The night Damon Cross met Elliot Harper, the entire city learned that a quiet Omega could shake an empire without raising his voice. Rain came down over downtown Vermont in silver sheets, turning the pavement outside La Rosa into a mirror of neon signs, black umbrellas, and headlights crawling past like tired stars. Damon stood beneath the restaurant awning in a charcoal coat that cost more than most people's rent, his hands bare, his expression calm, his presence doing what sirens and badges never could. It made people step aside. Across the street, a delivery van rolled away from the curb, its back doors still swinging, and then a boy stumbled out of the alley with a crushed wedding bouquet clutched to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him upright. White lilies, bent roses, ribbon dragging through the rain. Damon noticed the flowers first because they looked ruined with purpose. Then he noticed the boy, pale hair plastered to his forehead, dress shirt soaked through at the shoulders, one sleeve pulled too low over his hand even though the cuff was torn. He could not have been more than 21, slim and shaking, with the wide-eyed look of someone who had learned to apologize before anyone accused him. An Omega. Damon knew it before the wind shifted, before that faint scent reached him under the rain and exhaust. Lily water. Sugar. Fear locked behind cheap suppressant, like a candle trapped under glass. The boy stopped when he saw Damon, and for one suspended second, they simply stared at each other while the city moved around them. A cab hissed through a puddle. Someone laughed too loudly from inside the restaurant. Far above, a billboard flashed an ad for luxury condos no one in that neighborhood could afford. The boy's lips parted, but no sound came out. His fingers tightened around the bouquet until one white lily snapped at the stem. Damon's men, posted near the door, shifted automatically, but Damon lifted one hand, barely an inch. They froze. That was the thing about Damon Cross. He did not need to shout. He did not need to threaten. The city had spent years teaching itself to listen when he went quiet. The Omega took a step back, then swayed, catching himself against the brick wall. The movement tugged his sleeve higher for half a heartbeat, just enough for Damon to see the dark shadows circling his wrist, half hidden beneath rainwater and fabric. Not clumsiness. Not a fall. Not the story people told when the truth was too expensive to survive. Damon felt something old and cold move behind his ribs, but his voice stayed low. What's your name? The boy swallowed. His eyes flicked toward the alley, then to the street, then back to Damon as if every direction had teeth. Elliot, he whispered. Elliot Harper. Damon took one careful step closer and stopped with several feet between them, close enough to block the wind, far enough not to trap him. Elliot Harper, he repeated, as though placing the name somewhere safe. Who are you running from? Elliot's face crumpled for less than a second before he forced it smooth again, and somehow that was worse. The smile he tried to make was polite, practiced, and completely broken. I'm not running, he said. I just have a delivery. Damon glanced at the destroyed bouquet, the rain-soaked ribbon, the way Elliot held it like evidence and apology at the same time. To a wedding? Elliot shook his head once, then stopped, as if even that much honesty had cost him. The scent under the suppressant flickered, fragile and bright, and Damon's entire world narrowed to the boy in front of him. Elliot looked past Damon's shoulder, saw something, and went still. Not startled, not surprised, trained into stillness. Damon did not turn around. He did not have to. He saw the reflection in the restaurant window, the black SUV slowing at the curb, the silhouettes inside watching too carefully. Elliot's voice came out smaller than the rain. Please, he said, barely moving his mouth. Don't give me back to them. For the first time that night, Damon Cross smiled, and there was nothing warm in it except the promise he made when he stepped between Elliot and the street. Then they should have learned not to come into my city looking for you. Damon did not touch Elliot. That was the first strange thing Elliot noticed, and it confused him more than the black SUV at the curb, more than the rain, more than the fact that the most feared alpha in Vermont had just placed himself between an Omega florist and whoever had come looking for him. Most alphas reached first and explained later. Damon Cross only stood there, broad shoulders cutting off Elliot's view of the street, one hand lowered at his side like a closed door no one had permission to open. Behind him, the SUV remained idling. Its tinted window rolled down 2 inches, just enough for a pale hand to appear with a silver ring Elliot recognized, and his body forgot how to breathe. The bouquet crushed tighter against his chest. His sleeve slipped again. He yanked it down so quickly his fingers shook. Damon saw it. Of course he saw it. Men like him made empires out of noticing what other people tried to hide. Inside, Damon said, not as an order, but as a choice placed gently in front of him. Elliot glanced toward La Rosa. All golden windows, polished wood, and people who wore money like armor. He knew places like that. He delivered flowers to places like that. He was never meant to enter through the front. I cannot, he whispered. I am soaked. Damon looked at the ruined lilies, then at Elliot's shoes, thin canvas sneakers dark with rain. The floor will survive. It was such a stupid answer that Elliot almost laughed, except his throat felt packed with cotton. Damon stepped aside, leaving space for him to move. Not pulling, not guiding, not claiming, just waiting. Elliot had been waiting for months for someone to do that. So he walked. Every step into the restaurant felt louder than it should have. Conversations softened. Forks paused over plates. A woman in pearls turned to stare, then quickly looked away when Damon followed behind him. Elliot kept his eyes on the marble floor, counting each tile, because counting was better than panicking. 1, 2, 3. Do not shake. 4. Do not cry. 5. Do not look back. Damon led him to a private room near the back, where the noise of the restaurant became a muted hum beyond heavy doors. Warm light spilled across a long table set for people who had not arrived yet. There were crystal glasses, folded napkins, and a centerpiece of white roses so perfect Elliot's fingers ached to fix the angle of one stem. He noticed flowers before faces. It was safer that way. Flowers did not ask why he flinched. Flowers did not tell him he was being dramatic. Flowers did not smile while signing papers that turned a person into property. Damon removed his coat and draped it over the back of a chair, not over Elliot, not without asking. You work for Harper Floral on Mercer Street, he said. Elliot blinked. How do you know that? Your van has a crooked back bumper, a faded sunflower sticker, and a license plate light that needs replacing. Elliot stared at him despite himself. Damon's mouth did not move, but something in his eyes softened by 1 degree. I pay attention. Elliot looked down at the bouquet. So do I. The words slipped out before he could cage them. Damon leaned back against the table, giving him space again. Good. That single word landed strangely inside Elliot, like approval he had not known he wanted. He swallowed and turned the bouquet in his hands. The ribbon was navy blue. The groom had requested white lilies, white roses, and baby's breath, elegant enough for a wedding but cold enough for a funeral. Elliot had known something was wrong when the delivery address changed 3 times in one afternoon. He had known when his stepfather smiled too brightly and told him to wear long sleeves. He had known when the final card had no names, only a time, a room number, and the sentence every Omega in Vermont learned to fear. Be polite and behave. Damon washed his face while he remembered. That bouquet is not for a wedding, he said. Elliot shook his head. Rainwater slid from his hair to his jaw. No, what is it for? Elliot's fingers found the broken lily stem. Inside the hollow center, hidden beneath floral tape, was a tiny black flash drive no bigger than his thumbnail. He pulled it free and set it on the table between them. His hand looked very pale against the dark wood. Insurance, Elliot whispered. And if they find out I still have it, I will not make it home tonight. Damon looked at the flash drive as if it were not a piece of plastic, but a match dropped into a room full of gasoline. Elliot expected questions. He expected suspicion, pressure, maybe that sharp alpha impatience people dressed up as concern when they wanted answers faster than fear could give them. Instead, Damon reached for a clean white napkin, placed it beside the drive, and pushed both a few inches closer to Elliot. Keep it in your sight, he said. Elliot stared. You do not want to take it? Not unless you ask me to. That sentence should not have felt impossible. It was only 7 words. Simple. Ordinary. But Elliot had lived too long in rooms where simple things turned into traps. His fingers hovered over the flash drive, then closed around it again, slow and careful, like his own hand belonged to someone else, and he was borrowing it for the evening. Outside the private room, La Rosa continued breathing its expensive little breaths. Ice clinked in glasses. Someone laughed near the bar. Rain tapped the windows with patient knuckles. The whole city sounded normal, which felt rude, honestly. Elliot almost wanted to open the door and inform everyone that normal had been canceled. No more dinner specials. No more soft jazz. No more pretending that boys in soaked shirts did not run through alleys carrying evidence inside broken flowers. Damon crossed to a small cabinet and took out a dry towel still folded in hotel-perfect squares. He set it on the table, not in Elliot's hands. Again, choice. Always choice. It made Elliot's chest hurt in a way he did not have a name for. "You are cold," Damon said. Elliot nearly laughed. "That is what you are worried about." Among other things. Damon's gaze dropped to Elliot's sleeve, then lifted immediately, not lingering. "May I ask about your wrist?" The room went too still. Elliot pulled his hand closer to his body before he could stop himself. There it was. The flinch. The ugly little reflex that arrived before thought, before dignity, before all the speeches he had practiced in the bathroom mirror about being fine. Damon did not move. He only waited, broad and silent under the warm chandelier light. The kind of man who could make governors return calls and debt collectors forget names. Elliot hated that he felt safer. Because of it. He hated that his body believed Damon before his brain did. "It is nothing," Elliot said, because the lie was old and smooth and came out automatically. Damon's expression did not change, but something in the room did. Not anger. Not yet. More like a storm deciding where to stand. "How long have you had to say that?" Elliot's throat tightened. No one had ever asked it that way. People asked what happened. People asked who did it. People asked why he stayed, as if fear came with a map and a decent public transportation system. No one asked how long he had been translating pain into polite little sentences. His fingers curled around the flash drive until the edges pressed into his palm. "Since March," he whispered. "No. February. Maybe before that. It is hard to tell when you start counting by long sleeves." Damon inhaled once through his nose, slow and controlled. Elliot saw his hand close around the back of a chair, not hard enough to break anything, but firm enough to make the carved would complain softly. "Who made the arrangements tonight?" Damon asked. "My stepfather." The word tasted stale. Elliot hated calling him that. A stepfather was supposed to teach you how to change a tire, complain about grocery prices, maybe embarrass you at holiday dinners by telling baby stories that were not even cute. He was not supposed to know the exact price certain men would pay for an Omega with a rare scent and no family willing to ask questions. Elliot looked at the flash drive. "He told me it was a private event delivery. 12 blocks from the shop." Then the address changed. Then it changed again. When I opened the final card, I knew. Damon's eyes sharpened. "Knew what?" Elliot pulled the ruined navy ribbon from the bouquet and laid it flat on the table. Hidden beneath the damp satin was a printed emblem, silver ink on blue, a lily trapped inside a crown. Damon went completely still. The silence was so sudden that Elliot heard his own heartbeat. "You know it," Elliot said. Damon's voice came out quiet. "The Sterling Room." Elliot nodded. "An auction that does not call itself an auction. A charity dinner that does not serve charity. The kind of place where powerful people pretend they are bidding on art, and everyone knows the art has a pulse." For a moment, Damon looked less like a man and more like the shadow cast by one. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He did not glance away from Elliot as he answered. A voice spoke urgently on the other end, too low for Elliot to catch, but Damon's reply was clear enough to turn the air cold. "Lock every exit within 3 miles of the Sterling Room." Quietly, Elliot's stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" Damon ended the call and looked at the broken lilies, the hidden emblem, the Omega trembling under a borrowed towel he had not yet dared to pick up. "The thing they never expect," he said. "I am going to let them think they are still in control." The Sterling Room sat 12 stories above Vermont, like a secret pretending to be a skyline. From the street, it looked like any other private club for people who owned more suits than apologies. All black glass, brass doors, and a valet stand where every smile had been professionally trained. Elliot had delivered flowers there twice before, and both times he had gone home with the same strange feeling, as if the walls had watched him leave and taken notes. Now he stood in Damon's private dining room with the ruined ribbon on the table and wished, with embarrassing intensity, that he had chosen a different career. Maybe accounting, maybe dog grooming, something with fewer criminal galas and less emotional weather. Damon's driver arrived with a dry navy sweater, a pair of soft sneakers in Elliot's size, and a garment bag that made Elliot immediately suspicious because rich people never put normal things in garment bags. Damon placed them on a chair and stepped back. "There is a restroom through that door. You can change if you want." You do not have to. Elliot looked at him. Do you always talk like every sentence is a legal consent form? Damon blinked once. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth moved. Only when it matters. Elliot hated that his chest warmed. He hated it so much he picked up the sweater just to have something to do with his hands. 10 minutes later, dry and slightly less likely to dissolve, he returned to find Damon studying the silver emblem through a magnifying lens from his phone. The lily trapped inside the crown gleamed under the chandelier. White lily, Damon said quietly. Elliot stopped in the doorway. There it was. The thing beneath the thing. The secret under the bruises, under the suppressant, under every long sleeve and lowered gaze. You know what that means, Elliot said. Damon set the ribbon down with a care that made it worse. I know what people believe it means. Elliot let out a small, humorless laugh. That is a very diplomatic answer for a mafia boss. I have layers. Like an onion. Like a locked vault. Against his will, Elliot almost smiled. Almost. Then the feeling passed, because the words white lily had a way of draining color from the room. He walked to the table and touched the edge of the ribbon. My scent does something to alphas, he said. Not all of them. Not always. But enough. It can calm them down when they are angry or overwhelmed. It can make them feel clear for a few minutes. Peaceful. Like the whole world finally lowered its voice. Damon watched him without interruption. That alone nearly undid him. When I was younger, I thought it made me useful, Elliot continued. Then I got older and realized useful is a dangerous thing to be when powerful people are bored. His throat tightened, but he forced the words out. If he stopped now, he might never start again. The Sterling Room calls it private wellness patronage. They dress it up with contracts, donations, medical language, all very clean and shiny. But it is ownership with a better font. Damon's eyes went colder with every sentence, but his voice stayed gentle. How did they find you? Elliot looked down. My stepfather. He found old medical records after my mother died. He started making calls. At first, he said it was for my future. Then he said I owed him. Then he said nobody would believe in Omega who could not even keep his own hands from shaking. Rain moved against the windows like static. Somewhere beyond the door, Damon's men spoke in low voices, calm and efficient, building a net across the city without raising an alarm. Elliot should have felt trapped by that. Instead, he felt the smallest, most dangerous thing. Hope. Damon picked up the flash drive at last, but only after Elliot gave a faint nod. What is on this? Names, payment records, guest lists, and videos of them discussing which Omega families could be pressured quietly. Damon slid the drive into the inner pocket of his coat. Then tonight is not a rescue. Elliot frowned. What is it? Damon looked toward the window, where the Sterling Room's tower glowed in the distance like a crown with dirty hands. A public service. By 9:15, Elliot was sitting in the back of a black town car with Damon crossed beside him, wearing a navy sweater that still smelled faintly of cedar, rain, and a life that had never belonged to him. The Sterling Room tower rose ahead through the windshield, all glass and gold light, looking less like a building and more like a very expensive lie. Elliot pressed his hands together in his lap to keep them still. It did not work. His fingers trembled anyway, small traders tapping against each other like nervous applause. Damon noticed, because of course he noticed, but he did not comment. He only reached into his coat, took out a small velvet box, and opened it to reveal a plain silver pin shaped like a lily with no crown around it. This does not mean ownership, he said before Elliot could panic. It means my people know to protect your space. Elliot stared at the pin. Your people need jewelry to understand personal boundaries. Some of them are slow learners. That startled a laugh out of him, quick and breathless and almost embarrassing. It vanished just as fast when the car stopped at the curb. Camera flashes burst outside the entrance. Not news cameras, not yet, but society photographers, gossip accounts, private security feeds, all the little eyes rich people hired to make their secrets look glamorous. Damon stepped out first. The entire sidewalk adjusted around him. Valets straightened. Doormen stiffened. Conversations lost their courage. Then Damon turned back and offered his hand, palm up, waiting. Elliot looked at it for a long second. He thought of every hand that had grabbed too quickly, every smile that had asked for obedience, every room where choice had been dressed up as gratitude. Then he placed his hand in Damon's, not because he had to, but because for once, The decision was his. Damon's fingers closed gently, warm but not trapping, and together they walked into the Sterling room. The lobby smelled like polished marble, expensive cologne, and flowers Elliot recognized immediately because he had arranged half of them himself that afternoon. White lilies lined the walls and tall crystal vases, each bloom perfect, elegant, suffocating. His work had been used to decorate the cage built for him. That should have broken something in him. Instead, it made his fear turn sharp, useful, focused. Damon leaned slightly closer, voice low enough for only him. Tell me where to stand. Elliot looked up at him. What? This is your evidence. Your room. Your choice. Elliot almost said he did not know. Almost. But then he saw the elevator at the far end, the one reserved for private members, and remembered the delivery map, the changed addresses, the timing hidden inside the floral invoice. His shaking slowed. 12th floor, he said. North Ballroom. They put the auction behind the charity dinner, but the real guests used the service corridor after dessert. Damon nodded once. Then we arrived before dessert. They entered the elevator without another word. As the doors closed, Elliot caught his reflection in the mirrored wall. Pale face, damp hair, borrowed sweater, silver lily pinned over his heart. He looked terrified. He also looked present. That was new. On the 12th floor, the doors opened to a ballroom glittering with chandeliers and soft piano music. Men and women in tailored evening were turned as Damon Cross walked in with Elliot at his side. Recognition passed through the room like a draft under a locked door. Elliot saw his stepfather near the champagne table, face draining of color one careful shade at a time. A man at the podium smiled too quickly and reached for the microphone, but Damon lifted a hand. The pianist stopped. The room went silent. Every beautiful, terrible person in that ballroom looked at the alpha who had built his name in shadows and the omega they had expected to arrive alone. Damon did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Good evening, he said, smooth as black ice. I believe some of you were expecting a private sale. Elliot felt the room inhale. Damon placed one hand lightly at the small of Elliot's back without touching him, a shield made of space. There has been a change in program. Then Elliot stepped forward, heart pounding so hard it felt like thunder in his throat, and set a second flash drive on the podium where everyone could see it. Tonight, he said, his voice shaking but clear, you are going to listen. For one impossible second, nobody moved. The ballroom held its breath beneath a ceiling full of chandeliers, all that gold light trembling over crystal glasses, silk gowns, polished shoes, and faces that had forgotten how to look innocent. Elliot stood at the podium with both hands resting near the flash drive, not touching it, because if he touched it again, he was afraid the shaking would start. Damon stood several feet behind him, close enough to be a wall, far enough not to become one. That distance mattered. It mattered more than anyone in that room understood. The man with the microphone finally recovered first, a silver-haired alpha named Conrad Vale, who smiled the way locked doors smiled in nightmares. Young man, he said smoothly, I believe you are confused. This is a private charity event. Elliot looked at the white lilies lining the ballroom, his own flowers arranged like polite witnesses along the walls. I know, he said. His voice was not loud, but the microphone caught it and carried it to every corner. That is what makes it perfect. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone near the back reached for a phone. One of Damon's men, stationed beside the service corridor in a waiter's jacket, gave a tiny shake of his head, and the phone disappeared back into a pocket. Elliot almost laughed. Apparently Mafia customer service was very thorough. Conrad's smile thinned. Damon, control your guest. Damon's expression did not change. He is not my guest. Elliot felt those words land behind him, steady as a hand he had not asked for. He is the person you all came here to buy silence from. The room went colder. Not physically. The heat still hummed through the vents, and rain still tapped against the tall windows overlooking downtown Vermont. But the comfort drained out of the air, leaving only perfume, panic, and the faint green scent of lilies beginning to bruise in their vases. Elliot picked up the remote Damon had placed on the podium. His thumb hovered over the button. This was the part that had kept him awake for weeks, the part where every worst possibility gathered around his throat. What if no one believed him? What if they laughed? What if his stepfather looked at him with that tired, disappointed face and made him feel small in front of everyone? Elliot found him by the champagne table. Harold Harper stood rigid in a dark brown suit, his hand wrapped around a glass he had not tasted. His eyes were not angry. That would have been easier. They were pleading, as if Elliot was the one ruining the family. As if family was not supposed to mean safety first. Elliot pressed the button. The screens behind the podium lit up. Not with anything graphic. Not with anything that could be dismissed as scandal. Records appeared first. Clean documents. Bank transfers. Signed agreements. Messages with dates, names, donation amounts, and coded descriptions. Then came audio clips, short and clear. Voices discussing Omega registries like inventory. Voices deciding which families were vulnerable. Voices laughing about how fear made contracts easier to sign. The room changed one face at a time. A councilman lowered his head. A hospital board member stepped backward into a chair. A woman from the Vermont Family Foundation whispered, "Oh my God," as if God had not been waiting in that room for years with a notebook. Elliot's pulse roared, but his voice steadied. "You called it patronage. You called it wellness support. You called it protection. I called it what it was every time I had to hide my scent with medicine I could barely afford." He swallowed, eyes burning, but he did not look away. "I kept copies and flower deliveries because none of you ever looked at the person holding the bouquet." Damon moved then, only to place another flash drive beside the first. "And I made sure the city is looking now." Every screen in the ballroom flickered again. A live news banner appeared from 3 local stations at once. Outside, far below, camera crews were gathering under umbrellas at the Sterling Room entrance. Elliot stared at Damon. "You sent it out?" Damon met his eyes. "You said tonight they were going to listen." A sound rose from the crowd. Not quite a gasp, not quite a collapse. More like an entire room realizing the doors had always opened outward and they had just never expected the Omega to find the handle. Conrad Vale reached for the microphone again, but this time his hand stopped before it touched the stand. Elliot stepped closer to it first. His knees were shaking. His heart was shaking. But his voice was his own. "My name is Elliot Harper," he said, and for the first time in years, he did not lower his eyes when powerful people stared. "And I am done being polite." The city did not explode all at once. It cracked quietly, like ice under a careful foot. First came the phones buzzing across the ballroom, one after another, tucked inside suit pockets and jeweled clutches, each vibration carrying the same impossible truth. The broadcast was live. The files were public. The names were out. Elliot watched the realization move through the room and felt no triumph. Not yet. Triumph was too loud for what his body could hold. What he felt was smaller, stranger, and almost frightening. Space. For the first time in years, there was space between him and the people who had decided what his fear was worth. Conrad Vale stepped away from the podium, his perfect smile gone thin and colorless. Harold Harper stared at Elliot from beside the champagne table, looking older than he had 10 minutes ago, which was impressive because guilt usually aged people in private. Around them, Vermont's most polished monsters began speaking in urgent whispers. Charity patrons became suspects. Donors became liabilities. Friends became strangers, checking who was standing too close. Damon remained behind Elliot, silent and unreadable, but Elliot could feel the temperature of his attention like a coat around his shoulders. Not ownership, not pressure, presence. Then the north ballroom doors opened, and the Vermont ABO Protection Council entered with badges, tablets, and expressions carefully arranged into concern. Elliot knew that kind of concern. It wore clean shoes and used words like procedure when it meant control. A woman in a cream blazer approached first. Her name was Marlene Pierce. Elliot had seen her on television after every Omega rights scandal, promising reform in a voice so smooth it made apologies sound like elevator music. "Mr. Harper," she said gently, "you have been very brave. We need to move you to a secure location immediately." Elliot's fingers tightened around the podium. "Secure where?" "A protected facility until we can verify your statement." There it was. The soft cage. The polite lock. The room blurred at the edges, not because Elliot was fainting, absolutely not. He was simply having an extremely inconvenient emotional malfunction in front of approximately 100 criminals and several news cameras. Wonderful. Perfect. 5 stars. Damon spoke before Elliot had to. He has already verified it. Marlene turned to him with a practiced frown. "Mr. Cross, with respect, your involvement creates complications." Given your history, many will question whether Mr. Harper is truly acting freely under your protection. A murmur traveled through the room, quick and poisonous. Elliot felt it touch every bruise he had hidden, every lie he had swallowed. Of course they would turn Damon into the new chain. It was almost elegant in its cruelty. Take the first person who had asked permission and make him look like everyone else. Elliot looked back at Damon. For the first time since the alley, he saw something uncertain in his eyes. Not fear. Damon Cross did not look afraid, but he looked ready to step away if stepping away was what Elliot needed. That hurt more than it should have. Marlene softened her voice. Elliot, do you want to come with us? Everyone looked at him. The council, the cameras, his stepfather, Damon. The whole city seemed to lean closer. Elliot could have said yes. He could have said no. He could have screamed, which honestly felt like a fair middle option. Instead, he stepped away from the podium and walked to Damon. The room went silent. Elliot stopped in front of him, close enough to see rain still darkening the shoulders of his coat, close enough to notice that Damon's hand was open at his side, waiting for nothing, taking nothing. If I ask you to leave, Elliot said quietly, will you? Damon answered without hesitation. Yes. Elliot's throat tightened. If I ask you to stay outside the door, I will stay outside the door. If I never choose you. Something flickered across Damon's face, brief as lightning behind clouds. Then I will still make sure they cannot choose for you. Elliot closed his eyes for 1 second. One breath. One white lily breaking free from a crown. Then he turned back to the council and the cameras and every person who had expected him to trade one owner for another. I will give my statement, he said, voice clear enough to reach the live microphones. I will cooperate with any lawful investigation, but I will not be removed, hidden, managed, or renamed for my own good. Marlene's smile faltered. Elliot lifted his chin. And Damon Cross is not speaking for me. He glanced back once, just once, and found Damon watching him like he had become the only steady thing in a collapsing city. He is standing beside me because I asked him to. By 10:30, the Sterling Room no longer resembled a private club. It looked like the place where Vermont had cracked open. News vans packed the rainy curb, police lights washed the windows red and blue, and officials moved through the ruined ballroom collecting statements from people who had always believed signatures could bury sins. In a side lounge, Elliot Harper sat with a paper cup of water trembling between his hands while Damon Cross stood near the window, close enough to be seen, far enough not to cage him. Marlene Pierce had tried twice to place him under council protection, and twice Elliot had refused. The third time Damon's silent look sent her elsewhere. When Damon ended a call, he said the district attorney had the files. 3 judges had frozen every Sterling-linked account, and the whole operation was locked down before morning. In an hour? Elliot asked. 48 minutes. Elliot almost smiled, then remembered fear. They'll say you used me to take their empire. They'll say worse, Damon replied, and set a folder on the table. Inside were trust papers, property transfers, clinics, safe apartments, legal aid, doctors, emergency funds, all moved beyond Damon's control into an independent foundation with no cross-family seats and no conditions. Elliot's vision blurred. Why? Damon said, because protection that depends on me is still a cage with better lighting. Then a breathless staffer asked if Damon would declare legal claim over Elliot for safety. The old world reached for him one last time. Damon looked only at Elliot. Do you want me to answer? Elliot held the folder tighter. Yes. Damon stepped before the cameras and said, clear enough for the whole city. No one has a claim over Elliot Harper. Not the Sterling Room. Not the council. Not his family. Not me. If your laws only protect an Omega after an Alpha signs beside him, your laws are broken. Fix them. Thunder rolled over Vermont, and Elliot heard a door opening. 3 weeks later, Freedom looked like Harper Floral reopening at 7:42 on a Tuesday, with wet leaves, clean glass, a crooked sunflower sticker on the van, and Elliot in a pale blue shirt pretending he had not cried in the storage room before reorganizing ribbons like a man at war with office supplies. The Sterling Room was sealed, the council humiliated, and the White Lily Foundation had opened apartments, legal aid, and coffee-scented kitchens. Damon came every morning at 8:15, never crossing the threshold until Elliot opened. At first customers stared. Soon they watched the Alpha debate vase sizes and asked if daisies felt casual. One morning, Elliot wrapped a white lily with sky blue ribbon and handed it to him. "What do I owe you?" Damon asked. Elliot turned the sign to closed, opened the side gate, and smiled. "You can come in." Damon's eyes softened. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Elliot said. "I am sure." And Damon entered not a claim, but the life Elliot had opened.